Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Good Grief. My name is Dr. Christine Malone, and in this podcast, we talk about trauma, tragedy, and survival. In each episode, I will interview someone that has gone through grief in some way, and we will discuss the impact it has had on their life. By sharing these stories, we hope that others won't feel alone should they be going through similar situations. Enjoy. Okay, listeners, thanks so much for joining me for today's podcast. My guest today is a retired Air Force Command Chief Master Sergeant. That's quite the mouthful. And your name is Dave. And Dave, go ahead and tell us a bit about kind of your history and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So Dave is a guy that grew up in Northern California on a dairy farm in the middle of nowhere in a little tiny small town, and learning, my work ethic and my whole background is really starts there. And I write about the fact that I think everything in life you can learn on the farm. Life and death and adversity and hard work and the fruits of your labor and dealing with Mother Nature and setbacks and all those things that go along with that. So that was a blessing. I always joke that I went in the military so I could sleep in, because cows are pretty demanding things. You shouldn't have to milk them. And I went in the United States Air Force when I was 19 years old. I wanted to go in the Navy and be a plumber, and the Navy had a really bad recruiter, and the Air Force guy was nice to me, and God bless the Air Force. They brought me in, and I said I want to be a plumber, and they said your aptitude says you should go into medicine, and we're going to make you a medic. And as we talked about before we got on here, we both have backgrounds in medicine, and so I would have never thought going through school that I would have the aptitude to be a nurse or in nursing. And so it's along the story, it goes along with finishing my nursing degree and doing some mid-level provider stuff. But after 30 years, 6 months, and 24 days of being in the military, and picking up a wonderful wife along the way, and raising two boys, and 15 moves in 30 years, and living all over the place, and being exposed to a lot of leadership challenges, as well as combat time, and being in an environment that exposes you to a lot of trauma and tragedy. And so, along with that comes my journey, and I think we're going to talk, mainly about that. Some of it's personal, some of it's stuff you had to take people through, and some of it has become.
So one of the things I know you wanted to talk about was the concept of moral injury.
So
yeah. Tell us what that is and what that looks like. I'm going to bet a lot of our listeners have never heard that before.
Sure. So, Doc, I'm a storyteller, and I even lead through stories, and sometimes that just drives people absolutely crazy. But this story was actually published in the Air and Space Power Journal at Air University for senior leaders, as we kind of walk through that. And moral injury. All of your listeners probably have already sat forward and said, "Boy, where is he going to go with this?" And most people equate military experience with PTSD, and that's bombs, the things we can't unsee, unhear, and unsmell. And moral injury not only runs congruent with it, but also the sine waves also cross, and sometimes they're actually coexistent. But my story goes like this. I was selected to be the senior enlisted leader for all medical operations in the country of Iraq during 2008 during the surge. So the trauma center that we were at was the central point for either fresh trauma straight off the battlefield, or everything else in the country funneled through us for us to get people back home. So we saw just about all genres of things, everything from, children and families and those type of things. And at that time, during the surge, it was pretty dynamic battlefield conditions. And up in Baghdad, there was a place called Sadr City that had a lot of, we'll just call them bad guys in it. And they were really raising heck with the guys in the green zone in the middle of Baghdad. And so there was a decision made at that time to go in and clean that out. Well, what I mean by that is that's house-to-house fighting. The Fallujahs and the Ramatis and these big words that we remember, these battles that we remember, the house-to-house fighting. And that drives a lot of casualties. And as you know, being in medicine, military medical doctrine for that requires you to clear the beds. The article was called Clear the Beds. And what that means is taking your hospital back to almost like day one when it was built. Every bed's made, everything is there, all the equipment's there, everything's shiny and new, all the blood bank is completely full, and everything's ready to go because you need to handle these casualties. For us to move the Allied casualties or our sons and daughters was fairly easy. I mean, we brought planes in and moved them. But what we had acquired over the years or over that time frame was civilians. And we treated civilians quite often, but we were the only trauma center in the whole country at that time that was capable of doing very intensive medicine. So we had about a dozen people in there, everybody from young to old, that were receiving intensive medicine, like months long intensive medicine. And to the point where we had gotten the waivers and brought their families on base, and we knew them, and they had visitation. It was like a real hospital in a combat zone. It was kind of wild. And so we were pretty intimate with those folks. Well, clear the beds meant clear the beds. They meant every bed. And so that sounds easy, except there was no place to put them. So, on a leadership level, we were given two alternatives. One was don't clear the beds, disobey the order and deal with the consequences that go along with disobeying an order during wartime in a combat zone, or clear the beds, move these people to Baghdad, where the practice was to extubate them and to take all their adjuncts off. And if they lived, they lived. And if they died, they died, which meant basically euthanizing 12 people. Well, imagine doctors, Hippocratic Oath, nurses, people like myself, who have toiled over these people forever and have built relationships with them, regardless. And on top of that, just our obligation, our professional obligations to people and how we operate, being told to euthanize people at that level. Well, long story short is, being on the senior leadership team, having to do these decisions, a lot of discussions, a lot of emotion, a lot of anger. There was a whole leadership challenge in there, but there's also this ethical piece, this imbalance of morality versus military doctrine and orders, and there's this big struggle, and somebody has to make the decision. And when the decision was made, we flew those people to Baghdad and basically euthanized them. The back piece of this is what I have to live with all the time. The back piece of this is that we never did the operation. It came up to the day to do it, and we never did it. So the reason that we euthanized the people didn't even materialize. That's moral injury. And that is, and I would call that high-level moral injury at that scale. But for the non-military people out there that think it's just a military thing, it's not. Sexual trauma is moral injury. How your kindergarten teacher did something, with or to you, it can be morally injurious. How your father just evaluates your physical perception as a young girl or a young boy can be morally injurious. And sometimes we carry this around and we don't realize that's what it is. It's back to the inner child kind of thing. Well, what does that mean? In the trauma and in the personal trauma world, it means an awful lot, because this doesn't have a designation in the VA. It's not like you can walk in and go, hey, I'm morally injured, and somebody just rushes to you. I'm a moral injury specialist, and they rush to your aid. So you have to, you've got to have professionals around you that understand it and can help you work through it. But the second thing is you really have to fight to get to the point of being an owner and getting out of the victim stage. And it took me a long time. So when I transitioned, and we wanted to talk a little bit about military transition. When I transitioned from the military, it's just a huge chasm, Doc. There's just nothing there. And you come out of this culture and you've got camaraderie and purpose and teamwork, and the guy to the right and the guy to the left, or a girl to the right, a girl to the left, whoever that has, and somebody that has your six, and you're riding for the brand, and you got your name on one side of your shirt and your United States Army, Air Force, or whatever it is on the other side of your shirt. And you go out into the civilian world and none of that exists. And in fact, you're kind of like a football bat. Nobody knows what to do with you.
Yeah.
They don't know how to mine your aptitude. They don't know how to do these things. And you can get a little lost. You throw moral injury, PTSD on top of that, and this is where that phenomenon of no hope comes. And as I was showing a senior executive the other day, I said, do you know, I just drew a little tiny algorithm, and I said, if you just have the word hope at the top of the algorithm, and on one side it says yes, and on the other side it says no. Yes leads to a productive, happy, healthy type of recovery transition. No leads all the way down to self-elimination. And we're living in a nation right now that loses about 40 to 44 veterans a day
Yeah.
just to self-elimination. And and those numbers were skewed for a while because the VA didn't classify some of the means appropriately, so we don't really know what that is. And so you have this thing out there. Well, I lived this, and I was on the verge of that, and I've been the guy with the gun in my mouth that probably. We talked earlier. Somebody said, "Well, why didn't you actually pull the trigger? What was something that stopped you?" And ironically, this might give you something to think about. Of all the things that you could say, family, my wife, my kids, hope, all of those things, it has driven back to education. I think that if you educate yourself formally and informally, and you gather as much information about the world and about things around you, it gives you something to compare to. And I think loss of hope is when you feel like you're on your own, like nobody's ever gone through it, nobody understands you, and those type of things. And if you educate yourself and continue to grow yourself, which I had done, the Air Force wouldn't let me not, the military wouldn't let me. They were continuously developing me all the time, and I had some tremendous opportunities. I think it lets you know that out there in the big wild world, that there is somebody that's gone through something similar, probably something worse, probably with the same struggles, and somebody out there has figured out how to navigate this thing.
Yeah.
And maybe we can talk about this a little bit, or you can comment on it. But this transition from victim to owner is something that I don't think people realize is how powerful it is. And I didn't start getting better until I did two things. One is I had to drive the male ego to the side and understand that I need help. And the second thing is I had to say out loud, hi, when I speak to people, speak to groups, I say, hi, I'm Dave Nordel. On my opening slide on there says, I have PTSD. It says, I am the proud owner of PTSD and moral injury, because it doesn't go away.
No.
So if you get a lump on your head, right, you got two choices. You can lay in bed, pull the covers over the top of your head and lay there all day. Or you can paint a face on that thing, put a little sombrero on it, and give it a name, just introduce it to people, and just get on with it, right? Because it's not going to go away. So when you come out of this victim state and you get into the owner state, you can take this energy, because it's got this huge energy. This is with anybody with trauma. Trauma drives this energy, and we have the things we call triggers, and you get a trigger and it drives energy. And there's a moment in time in there where you can say, I'm going to change the polarity on this energy and turn it to a positive. Now, this is high level. I've gone through a lot. This is years of going through this stuff and making a lot of mistakes to learn that, yeah, this energy is not one way, and you actually control it. And if you can control it and turn it to a positive and start to drive it into whatever narrative or whatever thought process becomes positive and productive, it's just a new form of energy for you to utilize. And it also makes the triggers seem ridiculous. You almost have a conversation with your trigger and you go, you know what, it's probably not your time today. I'm really doing well, and I'm just not going to go there with you. Right? We can talk about this at a different time. And you almost have to make it a physical being, make it animate versus an inanimate thing. And I think people think about trauma and then the triggers that go along with it as inanimate, and it's very, very animate.
Kind of like, if I'm hearing, like turning something bad into something good, or making lemonade with those lemons, or whatever it might be, sort of thing. So, as I shared with me before we started recording, I shared with you that I got into higher education and writing and so on and so forth. The impetus for that was some trauma in my life. I lost a child due to a preventable malpractice error, and it really showed me that being in education was really my space, not being in that leadership position in healthcare. And I wouldn't have known that if it wasn't for my son. And I could have sat back and been the victim of medical malpractice, and so on. But instead, I took that and said, no, let's make something positive out of it. Let's change things. I do work with risk management, all kinds of stuff now that really makes a difference, rather than just be the CEO of a company and be altogether so important. And definitely had to put my ego aside to get there too. So I definitely resonate with the ego comment for sure. I also appreciate when you comment about the PTSD, how it doesn't go away. So I railed against that for a long time. I thought, that's not okay. No, it doesn't own me, whatever. Until I realized that it's actually just part of who I am, and that it's okay. It doesn't make me weak. It doesn't make me broken. It's just a part of who I am. It's just like that a scar that you have from an injury or whatever. It's part of that, and you learn to live with that. And I love your comments about the triggers. Not today. I'm gonna keep that one in mind for the next time one comes up for me. Not today, trigger. Not happening today. So
Right. Especially when you're rolling. When
I
you're
know, right?
rolling, when you're on a roll and
It's not a
something
good
happens.
time.
Unfortunately, my things are smells. So I can't even, I'm not in the majority of them. There's a lot of visuals, obviously,
Yeah, yeah,
but the unsmell of things. And so that is the hardest one, I think, because sometimes you can see something that's going to be a visual trigger, or you can feel something, or, the 4th of July, let's not go to fireworks, that kind of thing. But you can turn the corner or walk into a restaurant or just get into into a part of Seattle where you're at, and all of a
right.
sudden something hits the olfactories and you're like, oh, and it just takes you back. And it's,
Yeah. It's funny you made like that. For me, it's sounds. So it's alarms. So when my son was alive for 4 years, we had all the monitors on him, and every time the monitors would go off, we had these alarms and bells and whistles and so on. And even though it's been 20 years since he passed, when I hear beeps and alarms going off, I am triggered. I have to immediately know what is it happening. Is anybody in trouble? How do I turn it off? I just go there, right? It's like I can't just listen to it light and go, oh, it's an alarm over there. It's like, oh no, where's that alarm coming from? So I get it. I totally get that as well. With the smell, for me, it's the beeping alarms. Thankfully, and that's probably why I don't work in healthcare anymore either. Is the sound of alarms, like at hospitals and so on and so forth. They're going off all the time. So I don't even triggered all day long. It's kind of the thing too. So yeah. So tell us a bit about. I know you've written some books, and so on. So tell us a bit about why you did that, and then kind of what your writing is about, and who your audience is.
yeah, I think you'll appreciate some of this stuff because we probably have more in common. It's great. I love doing this. I think synchronicity is a great thing. You never know who you're going to run into. Back, gosh, it's been almost 2 years. I told you I tend to teach and lead and develop and grow people through stories. Some of them are my own, and then some of them are just metaphors and anecdotes and those kind of things. But yes, somebody stopped me one day and said, you should write all this stuff down. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And they said, well, you're talking to people and you're influencing people. You should write it down. So I thought, well, what would be a good book? This is book one. I said, well, what would be a good book? I mean, what kind of defines everything? And I thought, well, I'm at a point in time in my life that I've kind of gotten a lasso around this trauma. I've gotten a lasso around, having finished a career. And it's really, really important to me to give back. So the book's titled Giving Back: Life and Leadership from the Farm to the Combat Zone and Beyond. And my leadership guy, I guess if I had to just pick one, is Ken Blanchard, and because I appreciate the fact that he writes at the 100 level, and so anybody can pick up a book and read about a squirrel or a beaver or a goose, and they kind of get it. And he's consumable, right? So if you're tired, you can still read a chapter of Ken Blanchard and then put the book down and get back to it. So that was the whole premise behind the book, and that's the way I wrote it. So short chapters, one-liners at the end to make you introspective. It's not a hero book. It's not about here's Dave and he did great things. It's more of a failure book about here's Dave and he could have done better, or here's an example of something that could have done better. And I talk in the beginning of the book, I talk about family and friends a lot, and I'm vague in it. I chose to be vague, and I've been scolded for that. I probably should have had a little more texture and context in it. But the reason that I started the book with family and friends was, and I've started to talk more on this, is if you have trauma in your life and you're struggling and you need help, Doc, you got to learn who's on your life team, who deserves to be on your life team, and you have to run your life team like a CEO. And sometimes that means firing people.
Yes.
And just because somebody is in your family tree genetically does not give them the right to be on your life team.
And don't you think at times that you find out who those people are and you're surprised, right? It's like a coworker that you don't even know that well, but suddenly is on your life team. You're like, wait, what? But not your sister or something, right? So yeah,
right.
those are moments. I think especially when people go through trauma, you really realize who's on your team and who's not on your team.
And I think that's a higher level. That's a 400 or 500 level application to dealing with trauma, is really assessing your life team. Because I think some people are doing some of the right things and they just feel like I'm not there. And they have to look at what they're consuming, or who is enough in their circle that is giving them stuff to consume that may not be healthy. And sometimes you have to ask people to step aside, and it can be a little painful. So that's the genre of the book, and that goes through. There's a few war stories that hedge on PTSD. I've been asked why I didn't say it specifically in the book, and I said because I didn't write the book as Dave's stories or to be entertaining or to give you. I don't believe that there's 5 ways, 12 hows, or 7 habits of anything when it comes to leadership. Uh, there's you and your ability to be an empath and to have connection with people and to be agile. And so these are just little reminders for people to do that and to be introspective and to reflect on where they're at. Because as my buddy Kim Benoit wrote in her book, We've All Done It. It's about CEOs, and she writes about the missteps of CEOs. And she says, if you read this book and say, oh, look at all the stuff other people did, she goes, that's not true because we've all done it, right? We've all made a mistake.
That's how we learn.
So that's kind of there. The second book, which was it's still motivated by the farm. The second book is When the Cows Lie Down. And so if you're a farm kid and you know anything, scientifically they've done stuff to try to refute it. But when cows lie down in bunches, usually around a little tiny stick tree that isn't going to protect them from anything, you should probably pay real close attention to the atmospheric conditions, the weather. And I started to find, as I was out and about, and you and I hedged on this a little bit before we started, I started to find out that people in dealing with trauma, people that are leading other humans, which is probably the second most responsible thing you do besides raising children, people that are leading other humans have all these cows lying down in their midst, and they miss them. They walk right by them. And it's so preventative. And even when they do a post-mortem after a negative event, and somebody goes, oh man, that was right there in front of us, nobody still slows themselves down to go faster. And in trauma and in life and in leadership, I think that is really, really key to dealing with things. So when you have a trigger, everything speeds up, right? Everything starts to go fast, and it feels like it's out of control. It almost feels like you need to reach out and grab it and pull it back because it's not letting you process or deal with it. It just starts to take you somewhere. Slow down to go faster. I was going to write a blog about this. I was on a beach in Orlando visiting an old military buddy. And we're walking on the beach, and the seagulls are there. And I had him videotape. I ran and got the seagulls all to fly. We're doing some cool stuff, video. And the beach was darn near empty. And it was gorgeous. Water's perfect, splashing, and the sounds, and the sand, and the hard sand. And go stand up to your knees in the water. And I heard this sound, and it was a kid, and he was on a motorized bike. He wasn't even pedaling it. Big fat tires on it. Motorized bike, and he had a tank top on, dressed in beach clothes, and he buzzed right by me. He was right on the water line, and then he went by. And I looked at my buddy and I said, that guy is going to go tell people that he spent the morning on the beach.
Mm.
Yet he didn't get any of it. He didn't get the seagulls. He didn't pick up shells. He didn't wade up to his knees, but he blew by that. And he's going to check that off his list as I spent the morning on the beach. He's going to go on to the next thing. So the cows lying down is the metaphor to slowing down, and in that book is the clear the beds chapter, which spans the rest of these type of things. So yeah, and it's written in the same. It's written in the same way. So
yeah, the whole slowing down thing. So I know in interviews I've done, I know it's not just me. You try to get away from it, right? So I'm going to go faster so I can go ahead of it. I don't want to slow down and deal with this. I'm just going to keep on going, move on down, busy myself, find something to distract me is the more, I don't know, I want to say the more natural thing to do, easier thing to do. Maybe I'll say it that way, rather than slowing down and taking notice of it. So, yeah, that's kind of the thing. I also think it's important to note, not everybody deals with trauma in the same way, and some people with their moral injury or PTSD deal with guilt, whereas others of us don't. It's kind of like, do you feel victimized, or do you feel like you hurt someone else, kind of a thing? I talked to a physician who worked at the hospital when Hurricane Katrina came in and flooded everything.
Right.
They had to make some hard decisions about which patients they could get out and which patients they couldn't get out. And so they were going by, I asked him, so I'm thinking I'm a very analytical person. How would you make that decision? And he talked about severity of condition and how the people that he figured would survive were the ones that would get out first, the ones they didn't think were going to survive,
Mm-hmm.
the more ill ones, obviously. He's triaging, right?
Right.
So, but the guilt that he has from that is remarkable, absolutely remarkable. Even though I couldn't argue I'd do anything different in his position. What is he going to do, right? So those kinds of things I think definitely come up, and to own it and to say, I'm in charge. I like the whole idea of taking charge and saying, I'm in charge now. So even though I've got this trauma that's part of me, um,
Mm-hmm.
it own me. It doesn't define me. It doesn't drive me.
Right.
And so on. And the lessons learned. I personally am okay with all the lessons I've learned through trauma and tragedy and so on, because I am who I am, and I care. So there's
Right.
um, so yeah, the giving back to others through the writing, though, I think that's fantastic. I love to hear that from people who've gone through things and really share it, because a lot of times people don't share their story. They don't think anybody wants to know it, but I can tell you people always will gain something from it. They're going to read it and go, oh, wow, yeah, that I did that, or, I can't believe this. So
You want to see a whole C-suite fall out of their chairs, and it's a phrase that I coined in the book, and I was thinking about it when I wrote it. So this wasn't like something that I had in my back pocket and that I had been using. The writing of the chapter drove me to the one-liner, and I wrote, "Knowledge is power only when shared."
mm-hmm.
Dump that one in a C-suite and just do a pregnant pause.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, true. It's kind of like, well, how many people in the C-suite have a servant leadership style either, where they can, share with others and want to support others and so on. It's not usually the case. It's more, I've clawed my way up here. I deserve to be here.
And right, and you've got it. Yes, I walked through that minefield, and I'm not going to show you where the mines are at. I know.
Yeah, use a a metaphor with docs on doing call and so on. It's like, nope, you're gonna do your time. I did my time. It's like, okay, we could change the system for the better, but we can't, because you had to do your time, so everybody has to do their time now. It's just that sort of thinking makes me crazy. But yeah,
I worked at a teaching hospital. I've got a great story about that, so I totally get it. You're right.
yeah,
It's so true. This whole it's a hazing thing, right? When I was a freshman, I
yes, yes. It happens in higher education. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, "Well, I don't have to do that anymore because I've been here for 20 years and you haven't, so you get to do that now." And it's like, really? Is that really how we want to bring up the people behind us that we're trying to coach and mentor into our, the
Sure.
role when we leave them and so on? So yeah, you and I have a lot in common.
That's awesome. I love it. I love
Yeah.
it.
So do you have
Yeah.
anything else you'd like to share with us, though? I mean, you kind of shared the story about the military and coming out and so on. Anything else?
Yeah. Yeah, well, the journey, the leadership journey has taught me a couple of things. And so for those of us that have trauma, or maybe those of us that don't have trauma, but have somebody that has an experience in their life, or as I said, probably the second most responsibility that we get in our lives is leading other humans. To help build that hope and to get on a life team and to mentor requires empathy. And I think it's a lost skill because especially the younger generations, the millennials and the Z, for some reason, just are really not equipped with the Q&A level to empathize. And even if they do get to a Q&A level, when they do get the feedback that is difficult, they tend to move on from that. They don't take that on as a challenge. And I can't stress enough, this whole, so we started CPR because people were dropping dead in churches and gas stations, right? And we thought, oh, well, we need to teach the layman how to do CPR to bridge it to the professional gap. Well, nationally, we've got two programs. We have QPR and we have mental health first aid. And they are no different than an EMT class and a CPR class for mental health. And QPR is question, persuade, and refer, right? And so you have to ask the question. So how many times are we in an environment where we know that Christine is just not right? She never comes to work without her hair made up. She never comes to work without makeup. I've never seen her wear those shoes. Look terrible. That's just not her. And what we do is we roam around your desk, we talk about you at the water cooler, and then we let you go home.
Mm-hmm.
And then something catastrophic happens and somebody goes, oh, we kind of knew something was wrong, but they don't have the ability to do that because they don't want to get involved. And what CPR did for us as a nation was, when people are trained and they feel like they have some level of proficiency, they will intervene. When you are a layman and you don't feel like you have training, then you won't feel like you can contribute, or you'll screw something up. So you don't do anything.
Yeah.
So for those people out there, if you haven't heard of mental health first aid or QPR training, find it. It's out there. Somebody teaches it. I bet there's somebody at your university that teaches it.
Yeah.
And everybody should have that. There should actually be a national movement that tilts us towards having this in our workplaces. We spend 1/3 of our lives at work, and we spend very little. That's the work I do with veterans. I have a Vet Ready program, and it's new and it's just starting to roll out, and I'm really excited about it. And I've got some people that have resources that are going to help me get there. And in Montana, we're twice the national average in veterans. 12% of Montana is veterans. And we are number 1 or number 2 chronically in veteran suicide, substance abuse, mental health needs, and 44th in services. And these type of things can help bridge that. But Vet Ready is about actually working on the environment and the workplace to bring in the veterans so that they can be happy and healthy and spiritually, emotionally, and physically. And why not be part of that? And so if you feel unsure of yourself intervening with people with trauma or mental health, there's training to give you the confidence to do that. And then we start getting on the front end of this, right? And we're not having conversations after catastrophe.
Right. No, that's a good point. I know some of the training I go through as an instructor is how to talk to students that are having that whole, your hair is different, your shoes are different, whatever. And actually have a completely frank conversation that starts with things like, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Which to most people without the training, you're thinking, well, I don't want to put that idea in your head. Trust me, if it's there, it's already in their head. It's already there. So by you acknowledging it, then they can talk about it, and maybe they'll come out and say something about it, rather than go home and say, well, I was kind of worried about Dave today, but I wasn't sure what to say, but I don't know him that well, those kinds of things. It's really, I think one of the things I like about that is, any one of us can help another. We don't have to know them, don't have to have a personal relationship with them, but you can still reach out and help people. And that's called humanity. And as far as I'm concerned, it's kind of like where we all would like to be.
Could you imagine humaning when you're leading humans? Novel concept. Just be a human. It's it's amazing. Having been in medicine for so long and having worked as a mid-level provider out in the jungles and the sticks of nowhere, there's 2 things that I know. One is when you ask the question, healing starts, and 2 is people want to be touched. They want physical contact.
Yeah.
And when we avoid those 2 things, we actually compound the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say I consider myself to be I always say I'm not a hugger, but I can tell you that in times when I am in emotional pain, the best thing I can get is a hug from someone. And I don't like to admit that, because my brain, I think to myself, oh, no, we don't need that. But we do. We need that. We need that connection, and we need that touch, and to feel like someone, cares. Someone cares about us.
Sure. That's
And
right.
it may, as we go back to the other thing, it may not be like a family, or it may be somebody that your neighbor or whatever it might be, somebody steps in and gives a hand, which is so powerful. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that to get to the winner's circle, not that you're always there, you always have to keep getting back there. They kind of move the target on you. But to get to the winning circle with your own traumas, and then to help other people deal with their traumas, is that level of involvement. And so you have to do that. It's your self-talk, it's your self-coaching, it's your attitude. The company, my company's MaxFab Consulting, and MaxFab is a combat story about when I went to lead people. I thought, how am I going to get 235 medics through combat trauma for months on end and give them the best opportunity to come out of that mentally and physically and spiritually healthy? And it's all about attitude, right? Because you can control that. I can't control the casualties. I can't control what they look like, and I can't control how many come. but we can definitely all control our attitude. So when asked every day how I was doing, I said, I'm maximum fabulous. And if I wasn't maximum fabulous, I was working real hard to get there. And if you're not maximum fabulous, let me know how to help you get there, because that's where we need to be. And it turned into a mantra. Anyway, they pulled the flag, the Geneva Convention flag, off the hospital before I left, and they embroidered those words on the bottom of that flag.
I love it.
So that's why the company's named that. And I think that that's foundational to all of this. And, how you get up in the morning and how you look at things, even if it's a little low back pain, because I'm not getting any younger, you can take that on, or you can waller in it. And that's that victim versus owner kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, people are powerful. I think we all want to do the right thing. And if you have a gap that makes you unsure, fill it. Fill it with education. Fill it with the right people on your team. So,
Yeah, all great advice. Well, Dave, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been very interesting to chat with you. Like I said, I have so many things that I think, oh, we have that in common. We have that in common. So,
that's awesome.
so it's always nice to meet a kindred spirit and go, oh, this person, yeah. So, but thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. Have a great day, and thanks for having me. That's awesome.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Good Grief. To hear more about my personal story, please pick up a copy of my book, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival, available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible via Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online book retailers.